Okay, Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. Over to you,
The
Ashok.
seven realities: existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender. I give no importance to creed, dogma, caste, or the performance of religious ceremonies and rites, but to the understanding of the following seven realities. One, the real existence is that of the one and only God, who is the self in every finite self. The real love is the love for his infinity, for this infinity God, which arouses an intense longing to see, know, and become one with its truth, God. The real sacrifice is that in which, in pursuance of his love, all things body, mind, position, welfare, and even life itself are sacrificed. The real renunciation is that which abandons, even in the midst of worldly duties, all selfish thoughts and desires. The real knowledge is the knowledge that God is the inner dweller in good people and the so called bad, in saint and in so called sinner. This knowledge requires you to help all equally as circumstances demand without expectation of reward. When compelled to take part in a dispute, to act without the slightest trace of enmity or hatred, to try to make others happy with brotherly or sisterly feeling for each one, and to harm no one in thought, word, or deed, even those who harm you. 6. The real control is the discipline of the senses to abstain from indulgence in low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. 7. The only real surrender is that in which poise is undisturbed by any adverse circumstance, and the individual, amidst every kind of hardship, is resigned with perfect calm to the will of God. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, thank you. And then thank you to the internet on your side to give you a good audio experience. Thank you. And
Yes.
before we start, I once again thank Baba because this is officially the end of lockdown 4 in India. And it's no mean achievement that all of us have been on this program, doing this every day for every day of the lockdown starting from day 1 to lockdown 4. I still don't know what's going to happen tomorrow from a lockdown perspective, but I'm sure we are continuing every day for the next 15 days. So, compliments to all of you and thank you, Baba. And with that, I start on physical page 83, Life of the Spirit. I need to zoom it up 1 second. Yeah. Is my screen visible?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. In Life of the Spirit, True Karma Yoga. In true Karma Yoga, or the life of perfect action, there is proper adjustment between the material and the spiritual aspects of life. In this type of life, consciousness is not fettered by mundane and material things, but at the same time, it is not allowed to run away from everyday existence. The mind is not allowed to be immersed in the material life of gnawing wants, nor is it allowed to be merged in spiritual bliss. It is used to face and tackle the problems of life from the point of view of spiritual understanding. Matter as pliable instrument for expression of spirit. Proper adjustment between the material and spiritual aspects of life is not secured by giving equal importance to them. It is not secured by taking something from the material and something from the spiritual and then striking a balance between the two. The spirit must and ever will have an inviolable primacy over matter. However, the primacy is not expressed by avoiding or rejecting matter, but rather by using it as an adequate vehicle for the expressions of the spirit. In intelligent adjustment, matter has to play the role of a pliable instrument for the self manifestation of the spirit and must not in any way become obtrusive in its own right. Just as a musical instrument is valuable only if it gives expression to the song of a musician and becomes a hindrance if it does not yield complete subservience. Matter is valuable if it gives free and adequate expression to the creative flow of life and becomes an obstacle if it interferes with it. Spirituality requires subordination of matter, not rejection. Owing to the multifarious cravings of the mind, matter has a tendency to assume importance for itself. For the drunkard, wine is everything. For the greedy, the hoarding of money is all important. And for the flirt, the chase of sensations is the supreme end of life. These are examples of how, through diverse cravings of the mind, matter becomes unduly obtrusive and perverts the expressions of the spirit. The way to restore the dignity of the spirit is not to reject matter, but to use it for claims of the spirit. This is possible only when the spirit is free from all cravings and is fully conscious of its own true status. When this is achieved, an individual may have material goods but is not caught up in them. When necessary, he may use them as means for the life of the spirit, but he is not allured by them, nor does he become restless for them. He realizes that in themselves they do not constitute the real significance of life. He dwells in the material and social environment without any hankering for them, and being unattached is able to convert them into spiritual life. Freedom of spirit expressed through dominion over matter. When once true adjustment between spirit and matter is secured, there is no phase of life that cannot be utilized for the expression of divinity. No longer is there any need to run away from everyday life and its tangles. The freedom of the spirit that is sought by avoiding contact with the world and retiring to a cave or to the mountains is a negative freedom. When such retirement is temporary and is meant to digest worldly experiences and develop detachment, it has its own advantages. It gives breathing time in the race of life. But when such retirement is grounded in fear of the world or lack of confidence in the spirit, it is far from helpful in the attainment of real freedom. Real freedom is essentially positive and must express itself through unhampered dominion of the spirit over matter. This is the true life of the spirit. The life of the spirit is the expression of infinity and as such knows no artificial limits. True spirituality is not to be mistaken for an exclusive enthusiasm for some fad. Spirituality covers the whole of life. Oops. I don't know what I pressed. Spirituality covers the whole of life is the chapter, subtitle. It is not concerned with any ism. When people seek spirituality apart from life, as if it had nothing to do with the material world, their search is futile. All creeds and cults have a tendency to emphasize some fragmentary aspect of life, but true spirituality is total in its outlook. The essence of spirituality does not consist in a specialized or narrow interest in some imagined part of life, but in a certain enlightened attitude to all the various situations that obtain in life. It covers and includes the whole of life. All the material things of this world can be made subservient to the divine game, and when they are thus subordinated, they become auxiliary to the self-affirmation of the spirit. The value, body, not necessarily hindrance to spiritual life. The value of material things depends upon the part they play in the life of the spirit. In themselves, they are neither good nor bad. They become good or bad according to whether they help or hinder the manifestation of divinity through them. Take, for example, the place of the physical body in the life of the spirit. It is a mistake to set up an antithesis between flesh and spirit. Such contrast almost inevitably ends in an unqualified condemnation of the body. The body obstructs spiritual fulfillment only if it is pampered as having claims in its own right. its proper function is rightly understood as ancillary to spiritual purposes. The rider needs a horse if he is to fight a battle, though the horse can become an impediment if he refuses to be completely submissive to his will. In the same way, the spirit needs to be clothed in matter if it is to come into full possession of its own possibilities, although the body can at times become a hindrance if it refuses to be compliant with the requirements of the spirit. If the body yields to the claims of the spirit as it should, it is instrumental in bringing down the kingdom of heaven on earth. It becomes a vehicle for the release of divine life, and when it subserves this purpose, it might aptly be called the temple of God on earth. Since the physical body and other material things can be used for the life of the spirit, true spirituality does not take any hostile attitude toward them, but seeks expression in and through them. Thus, a perfected person does not look down upon things of beauty or works of art, attainments of science, or achievements of politics. Science, art, politics can serve spiritual ends. Things of beauty can be degraded by being made objects of craving or jealous and exclusive possessiveness. Works of art can often be used to augment and exploit egoism and other human frailties. The attainments of science can be used for mutual destruction, as in modern wars. Political enthusiasm without spiritual insight can perpetuate social and international chaos. But all these can also be rightly handled and spiritualized. Things of beauty can become the source of purity, happiness, and inspiration. Works of art can ennoble and raise the consciousness of people. The attainments of science can redeem humanity from unnecessary suffering and handicaps. Political action can be instrumental in establishing a real brotherhood of humanity. The life of the spirit does not consist in turning away from worldly spheres of existence, but in reclaiming them for the divine purpose, which is to bring love, peace, happiness, beauty, and spiritual perfection within the reach of everyone. Detachment does not mean indifference. However, those who would live the life of the spirit must remain detached in the midst of worldly things without becoming cold or indifferent to them. Detachment should not be misunderstood as lack of appreciation. It is not only compatible with the true evaluation of things, but is its very condition. Craving creates delusion and prevents right perception. It nourishes obsessions and sustains the feeling of dependence upon external objects. Detachment promotes right understanding and facilitates perception of the true worth of things without making consciousness dependent upon external objects. To see things as they are is to grasp their real significance as parts of the manifestation of the one life, and to see through the veil of their apparent multiplicity is to be free from the insistent obsession for anything in its imagined isolation and exclusiveness. The life of the spirit is to be found in comprehensiveness that is free from clinging and in appreciation that is free from entanglement. It is a life of positive freedom in which the spirit infuses itself into matter and shines through it without submitting to any curtailment of its claims. The next section, yeah.
Can I say something, Karthik?
Sure, sure.
The last two sentences I think are very profound. Perhaps you can highlight it, or you can just, the life of the spirit which we found.
Yeah, maybe you can read again.
Sure. Yeah, these two are powerful.
Two sentences. Yeah.
The life of the spirit is to be found in comprehensiveness that is free from clinging and in appreciation that is free from entanglement. It is a life of positive freedom in which the spirit infuses itself into matter and shines through it without submitting to any curtailment of its own claims. I will also highlight it. The next title is True Spirituality is Comprehensive. The things and happenings of this earthly existence are looked upon as extraneous only until they are engulfed in the advancing tide of comprehensive spirituality. When once they find their right place in the scheme of life, each of them is seen to participate in the symphony of creation. Then spirituality does not require a separate or exclusive expression. It does not become degraded by being concerned with the ordinary physical, intellectual, and emotional needs of people. The life of the spirit is a unified and integral existence that does not admit of exclusive or unrelated compartments. Divine love, a creative and dynamic response to environment. The life of the spirit is an unceasing manifestation of divine love and spiritual understanding, and both these aspects of divinity are unrestricted in their universality and unchallengeable in their inclusiveness. Thus, divine love does not require any special type of context for making itself felt. It need not await some rare moments for its expression, nor is it on the lookout for somber situations that savor of special sanctity. It discovers its expression in every incident and situation that might be passed over by an unenlightened person as too insignificant to deserve attention. Ordinary human love is released only under suitable conditions. It is a response to certain types of situations and is relative to them. But divine love, which springs from the source within, is independent of stimuli. It is released, therefore, even in circumstances that would be looked upon as unfavorable by those who have tasted only human love. If there is a lack of happiness or beauty or goodness in those by whom a perfect master is surrounded, these very things become for him the opportunity to shower his divine love on them and to redeem them from the state of material or spiritual poverty. His everyday responses to his worldly environment become expressions of dynamic and creative divinity, which spreads itself and spiritualizes everything he puts his mind to. Spiritual understanding not born of blind imitation. Spiritual understanding, which is the complementary aspect of the life of the spirit, must be distinguished from worldly wisdom, which is the quintessence of the conventions of the world. Spiritual wisdom does not consist in the unquestioning acceptance of the ways of the world. The ways of the world are almost always the collective effect of the actions of materially inclined people. Worldly people consider something to be right and make it right for persons of similar inclination. Therefore, the blind following of conventions does not necessarily secure wise action. The life of the spirit cannot be a life of uncritical imitation. It must have its basis in the true understanding of values. That is the end of this chapter. So I will just pause for questions and any summarization.
Can I say something? Summary?
Sure.
So I think here it means that the material things or materiality is a means to an end, but not an end to itself.
Yes.
That's one of the meanings from this.
The line that I loved the most in the paragraph which we just read. Thus, divine love does not require any special type of context for making itself felt. So, so everything that we do, there is a scope of expression of divine love, whatever we are doing.
Correct.
So that's the beautiful sentence actually.
Yeah, that too in our everyday life. So
everyday life, yeah.
Good.
It does not await some rare moments for its expression. Beautifully written.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think to add to what Nigam said, there is a chapter called, we later read, called the spiritual infinity of the truth, the infinity of the truth, where what Nigam said is correct, that every action you do, you can experience divinity. It is almost like applying the Parvardigar prayer into every action we do. And the second thing about this chapter is life of the spirit is it is comparing spiritual life and material life. And as Ashok said, material life is not the goal; it's a means, basically, which is correct. And both are, complementary to each other. But it's actually the life of the spirit that's what we should be focusing on, because we need to take care of the material body. It is like a vehicle, it's a medium. So, not to get attached to the material body, but also be cognizant where it says that, you know, um, for the release of divine life, and when it subserves this purpose, it might aptly be called the temple of God on earth. So the material body has to be taken care of. As they say, the body is the temple of the soul. I think that is why we have these Hatha Yoga practices or Kriya Yoga Vipassana to take care of the gross body, subtle body, mental body. Because if the body is not fit and disciplined, uh, I think the spiritual life can be very challenging. So I think that is another conclusion of this. Another phrase that came out of this chapter is again the word divine game. I love that quote. The divine game. It's on page 85. So it is a divine game. And another important word that we keep reading about is adjustment between spirit and matter. So this is another word that we need to keep focusing on adjustment. And so and that's about it. Jai Baba.
Great. So with that, we move to
I
9.
have a small comment to make.
Sure.
The chapter starts with isms and spirituality.
Yeah.
In this context, many of the isms sort of compartmentalize and then seclude spirituality into a lot of rituals and practices and doesn't bring them into the mainstream of stream of life or life activities. So that is a correction we need to always think of. So Baba is liberalizing or allowing us to live a life with the background of spirituality in the material world. That is the essence of this.
Yeah, like a musical instrument. Very beautiful
Uh,
example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said.
I think you have to go to page 94, the
Yeah, I
avenues
know.
to understanding.
I know. 93 avenues to understand. Yeah. So this chapter is avenues to understanding. 94. Spirit not understood through mind. The different avenues that lead to spiritual understanding can be understood best through an initial distinction between spirit and matter. In order to understand matter, we have material means, and in order to understand the spirit, we have spiritual means. Matter is not understood through the mind or the intellect working upon data given through the different senses, but spirit can be understood only through the spirit itself. This highest form of understanding, in which the spirit enjoys self-knowledge without using any instrument or medium, is the very rare and most difficult to attain. The best approach for the understanding of the spirit is through the heart and not through the mind. Concepts of mind toward matter inadequate for spirit. The mind is accustomed to work upon material things, and its driving power for this intellectual understanding of material objects is derived from lusts and cravings. When mind is turned towards spiritual problems, it tackles them along lines it is accustomed to. And in so doing, mind uses concepts it has invented for the intellectual understanding of material things. However, this approach to understanding spiritual problems is doomed to fail because all concepts that the intellect evolves for knowledge of material things are inadequate for understanding the spirit. It is like trying to see through the ears or hear with the eyes. If the mind tries to understand the spirit independently of the heart, it is bound to use analogues from the material world, and this inevitably leads to the spirit being looked upon as an object of the mind, which it is not. Conflict between mind and heart. As contrasted with the method of the mind, which has its foundation in sensation and proceeds through inference and proofs to conclusions, there is the more direct method of the heart. The heart intuitively grasps the values that are progressively realized in the life of an individual as he goes through the diverse experiences of the world, and as his attention is centered on arriving at spiritual understanding. In the life of most persons, the mind and the heart are at loggerheads, and the conflict between the two creates confusion. So, this section is conflict between mind and heart. The heart, which in its own way feels the unity of life, wants to fulfill itself through a life of love, sacrifice, and service. It is keen about giving instead of taking. It derives its driving power from the inmost spiritual urge, expressing itself through the immediate intuitions of the inner life. It does not care about the proofs or intellectual corroborations that the mind seeks while dealing with material objects. In its objective handling of the material world, mind is saturated with experiences of multiplicity and separateness, and therefore feeds the egocentric tendencies that divide humanity and make it selfish and possessive. But the heart, feeling in its inner experiences the glow of love, has glimpses of the unity of the spirit and thus seeks expression through self giving tendencies that unite humanity and make it selfless and generous. Therefore, there is necessarily a conflict between the inner voice and the deliverances of the intellect, which are based upon the apparent and superficial aspects of life. Mind craves assurance or conviction. When the mind encroaches upon the province of the heart, it does so by requiring assurance or conviction as a precedent condition that must be fulfilled before there is a release of love. But love is nothing if it is not spontaneous. It cannot be a conclusion of reasoning. It is not a fruit of the spirit of bargaining. If you want to be certain about the object of love before giving your love, it is only a form of calculating selfishness. Many persons, for example, want to be convinced of my divinity in order to be able to love me. That is to say, they want me to give them objective proofs of my spiritual status by performing miracles. Conviction of this type is often a hindrance rather than a help in releasing the highest form of love, which is utterly indifferent to what it might receive from the object of love. Intellectual conviction hinders spontaneous love. When the mind seeks conviction or corroboration through objective proofs and miracles as an aid to spiritual understanding, it is encroaching upon the sphere that properly belongs to the heart. Conviction and corroboration become important when a person desires guarantees for securing certain definite and tangible results in the objective world. Even if we suppose that a person is intellectually convinced of the existence of God by means of miracles or some such objective data, this will not necessarily release his heart. The allegiance he might perhaps give to God as a result of such cold revelation will be either through fear or through a sense of duty. Love, in which there is no sense of restraint, cannot be born of a conviction that is based upon things accessible to the mind. And where there is no love, there is no bliss or beauty of being. In fact, God's nature as the ocean of love cannot be grasped by the mind. God has to be known through love and not through an intellectual search for miracles. This is the reason why I do not perform miracles for those who are closest and dearest to me. I would rather have no following than use miracles for convincing others of my divinity. It is true that while loving me, people often do have spiritual experiences that were hitherto unknown to them, and these experiences help them in the further opening of their hearts. But they are not meant to feed the mental craving for intellectual conviction, and they should not be regarded as the goal. Spirit glimpsed only through heart. When a person has his eye on the results of action instead of being concerned solely with their intrinsic worth, he is trying to tackle spiritual problems through the mind alone, and in doing so is interfering with the proper functioning of the heart. Spirit is glimpsed only through heart is the section. Mind wants to have all kinds of things and therefore seeks objective proofs, convictions, and assurances. This demand of the mind fetters the spontaneous outflow of love, which at once depends upon and furthers true spirituality. You cannot love through the intellect. What you may get through the mind is a theory of love, but not love itself. The kind of knowledge that certain types of yogis have attained through their minds is merely intellectual and dry. It cannot give them the spiritual bliss that characterizes the life of love. Love and happiness are the only important things in life, and they are both absent in the dry and factual knowledge accessible to the intellect. Spirituality does not consist in intellectual knowledge of true values, but in their realization. It is this knowledge of inner realization that is worthy of being called spiritual understanding. And this is far more dependent upon the heart than on the mind. Knowledge of the intellect alone is on the same footing as mere information, and being superficial, it moves on the surface of life. It gives the shadow and not the substance of reality. The hidden depths of the ocean of life can be gauged only by sounding the heart. Freedom from wants possible only in supramental existence. The intellect of most persons is harnessed by innumerable wants. From the spiritual point of view, such a life is the lowest type of human existence. The highest type of human existence is free from all wants and is characterized by sufficiency or contentment. Everyone is seeking happiness, but few have it. For lasting happiness dawns only when there is complete freedom from wants. This highest state of non-wanting may outwardly seem to imply inaction and to be easy to attain. However, if anyone tries to sit quietly without inwardly wanting anything and with full consciousness, that is, without going to sleep, he will realize that such a state of non-wanting is very difficult to attain and that it can be sustained only through tremendous spiritual activity. In fact, complete non-wanting is unattainable as long as life is mind-ridden. It is possible only in supramental existence. One has to go beyond the mind to experience the spiritual bliss of desirelessness. Conditions for harmony between mind and heart. Between the two extremes of a life harassed by wants and a life completely free from wants, it is possible to arrive at a mode of practical life in which there is harmony between the mind and heart. When there is such harmony, the mind does not dictate the ends of life, but only helps to realize those ends that are given by the heart. It does not lay down any conditions to be fulfilled before an utterance of the heart is adopted for translation into practical life. In other words, the mind surrenders its role of judge, which it is accustomed to play in its intellectual queries concerning the nature of the universe, and accepts unquestioningly the dictates of the heart. heart must be free to determine ends of life. The mind is the treasure house of learning, but the heart is the treasure house of spiritual wisdom. The so-called conflict between religion and science arises only when there is no appreciation of the relative importance of these two types of knowledge. It is futile to try to glean knowledge of true values by exercise of the mind alone. Mind cannot tell you which things are worth having. It can only tell you how to achieve the ends accepted from intellectual sources. In most persons, the mind accepts ends from the promptings of wants, but this means denials of the life of the spirit. Only when the mind accepts its ends and values from the deepest promptings of the heart does it contribute to the life of the spirit. Thus, mind has to work in cooperation with the heart. Factual knowledge has to be subordinated to intuitive perceptions, and the heart has to be allowed full freedom in determining the ends of life without any interference from the mind. The mind has a place in practical life, but its role begins after the heart has had its say. Harmony of mind and heart implies cooperative functioning. Spiritual understanding is born of harmony between the mind and heart. This harmony of mind and heart does not require the mixing up of their functions. It does not imply cross-functioning, but cooperative functioning. Their functions are neither identical nor coordinate. Mind and heart must, of course, be balanced, but this balance cannot be secured by pitting the mind against the heart or by pitting the heart against the mind. It can be attained not through mechanical tension, but through intelligent adjustment. Mind and heart may be said to be balanced when they serve their proper purpose and when they perform their respective functions without erring this way or that. It is only when they are so balanced that there can be true harmony between them. Such harmony of mind and heart is the most important condition of the integral, undivided life of spiritual understanding. This is a fascinating chapter, and I think I understand why you put this after spirit and matter. I think, and you warned us about the word adjustment. You're spot on. I think I feel very, very nice reading this chapter because I've always been struggling with this mind and the heart. And like Kama, I'm a mind person. So I think this is for me.
By far, this has been the best chapter in discourses for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wouldn't disagree with you, Sunil. I felt the same way.
That's why in Baba says, "Love me, love me, love me." So as you love, and more and more and more, your wantings go down. Your mind becomes subservient to your heart. So
Yeah.
that's what he has been.
Fascinating.
But isn't it a fact that when we talk about loving Baba, it has to do more with our how we apply or say our relationship with the world, people and things, friends, family. So sometimes I wonder, there is something called spontaneous love and there is something called cultivated love. Now, I think we have not come to the chapter on love. There are some that comes in the last part where it comes about love and ego. Now, as Karthik just mentioned, these two chapters, Avenues to Understanding and Life of the Spirit, they are very much interconnected because basically it's a comparison between heart and mind or heart and head or what we call as the intellect. Then one is about spiritual life and material life. And second about uh, the concept of love and intellect, which I look at it as the ego, basically. So it's a beautiful comparison between spirit and matter. And I think in this chapter, spiritual understanding is a very important concept that is emphasized here, where it says spiritual understanding is born of harmony between mind and heart. So I think this chapter is very much of a practical manual for life. How we deal with the conflict between mind and heart in every situation. As I think Mr. Dar said, Sunil, that this is a very important chapter. So I love this chapter myself, and love and happiness are the only important things in life. So this is something that is also emphasized here. But how to get there is the biggest challenge. Okay, Bob. Vidya, any comments from your side? We have two very important chapters which you should give some color on it.
I guess, yeah, this is a very important chapter, and I was also very fascinated to read this chapter. It kind of confirms, I mean, I have read it before, but this was like really enlightening to me once again. And I felt, this kind of confirms my understanding of, I give a lot of importance to heart over head. And whatever I may do, I eventually seek confirmation through my heart, not so much through head. And I think this is beautiful, and I am like in a bliss to kind of feeling very happy that Baba has explained it so beautifully. Yeah, so I think a lot of, I mean, there is a still, even after reading this, maybe many of us will feel the challenge of, how to really love is a very big problem for many. Yeah, I have my friends, and that to name one is Kama, and who keeps calling again and again and asking me how to love. So,
are you talking about men or many?
Men, some men, and also some women also calls, and probably some women also ask this question, how to love. But then women have their, they're somewhere convinced that whatever they are doing and the way they are loving, they are happy about whatever level of love they have. So very few women, but many men who ask how to love. But till today, I have not been able to coach them on how to love. So yeah, it is beautiful, but I think this is beyond the words to give any version or any story. And but I can only confirm that her heart is her heart is superior to head. You can feed data to head, but you should process it through heart.
I think you hit the nail on the head. So in my excitement about the chapter, I forgot to tell one aspect which you brought out, which is all this is fine, but how do you love?
I really
how do you put the heart above the mind, right?
So what I always tell men is at least love one person in your life totally, without thinking of any conditions, without having any restrictions. At least love one person in your life, submitting, because loving God, loving human being is easier than loving God, because he is invisible and all that. Unless your consciousness is very high, divine love becomes a little difficult. But loving one person wholeheartedly, giving up everything for that person and really experimenting is a worthwhile journey. And I think then some doors open through that. And this could be your son, your daughter, your husband, your wife, or your friend, or whatever. But let's just love one person wholeheartedly.
Even if they don't deserve it?
Yeah, that is.
Keep your mind away, come on.
If you can love someone
Kama, if you say you are becoming judgmental, love and judgmental cannot go together. You have to accept their inequalities, their deficiencies, and then try to help them out or be for them all the time. That is love. So being judgmental cannot be love.
No, I'm saying like not even judgmental. There is something like, what looks good on paper. I was talking about cultivated love, as you're right. I mean, I'm not denying that fact. there's always somebody in your life that you can love. It's not that everybody that you dislike, So she's right. I mean, you have to have unconditional love. That's a gift of Baba, So.
Yeah.
I think the way we read Seven Realities, once in a while, we should also read How to Love God. So maybe.
Absolutely.
I think.
Yeah, so Baba has given a beautiful message how to love God. So
maybe we
I
should
think
end
it has
each
to be very
discourse with that.
spontaneous.
yeah.
Without thought, it has to be very
Yes.
spontaneous. When you don't think you really love somebody,
Yeah,
it has to be just
it
very,
will
very
become
spontaneous, like a fountain of water.
That's the aim, but in the beginning it will not be spontaneous, and we have to follow as an instruction what Baba is saying. That's the way I at least look at it. Just do the way Baba is saying, and hopefully Baba will help us that it becomes spontaneous in all of us. That's a long journey, I suppose. Yeah.
Okay. So we will continue with the next chapter. If there's any other points, we can continue discussing. But otherwise, we can go to
page number 117,
117,
Infinity of the
Infinity.
Truth.
Yeah, I got it. Infinity of the truth, source of error in spiritual valuation. Most persons are under the impression that anything that can claim to have spiritual importance must necessarily be very great from the worldly point of view. Thus, to be considered spiritual, an act must have far-reaching effects or must substantially affect an extensive area of life. They are constantly judging the worth of an action by the magnitude of its consequences. Man is ordinarily so immersed in the objects of the gross world that the dimensions, magnitudes, and quantities of the gross world unconsciously creep into his estimate of spiritual worth and pervert his evaluation. Mathematical infinity. All this confusion is due to the fact that man's mind is often dominated by mathematical ideas, even when it is concerned with estimates of a spiritual nature. But that which is spiritually great is different in kind from that which is mathematically great. The mathematical idea of infinity is constructed by imagining the collection of an infinite number of units, each of which has a fixed and identical value or importance. Actually, such mathematical infinity is unreachable even in imagination, because for any imaginable number, we can conceive a number that would be still greater. Each unit is false if it is taken to have separate and exclusive existence or importance. The mathematical idea of infinity thus turns out to be product of an imagination activated by false assumptions.
Hello.
Karthik, you're breaking. We can't hear you.
Karthik, you are not audible.
I think we have to wait for a bit.
Shall we continue reading till he comes back? Or
Yeah. Just 1 second. I just lost internet through a big outage where everything, all my devices went off. So it's just booting back.
right.
So, can I share something in the meanwhile Karthik comes back? I think, Karthik, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Go on.
Okay, so I'm just sharing some intuitive experience I had recently, and I thought because this is COVID times and all of us are going through a lot of introspection, and I'm purely sharing it from my intuition without any judgments or whatever. But however you can process and share your thoughts, and you are most welcome to do that. So I had this thought, this thing that we are moving into a different time dimension. The whole galaxy must be going through a different time dimension, and I had this view that I am into one long day where there are so many days and there are so many nights, but there is only one long day. So I don't see that, when I sleep in the night, it is night, and when it is day, it is day. I feel day and night have become one, and there is only one day and one night. That's the feeling I'm getting. So through that experience, when I look into, I feel we're moving into a different time dimension. And to confirm that, I think there's somewhere this NASA data coming that there is a black hole near Earth, very close to Earth, and they are not able, I think they are not able to make out whether we have entered black hole or not, and what happens in the black hole no one knows. So it is all a guess of this may be there, that may be there, but I have a strong intuition that we are moving into a different time zone, and that is why there is a kind of stillness in the whole world. I mean, you see same COVID news every day, same thing is happening. So it is a great introspective time, and if whatever we may process intuitively is going to yield a great result for each one. I think the self growth is going to be tremendous at this point of time if someone really tries to put an effort.
Wow, that's an interesting decision we took to do this at this time then. So it's all Baba's wish, and I'm glad we are doing what we are doing.
Yeah, so this group is doing something great according to me, because it is I'm seeing that the like-minded people are on this group, the people who have some kind of equation and the wavelength that matches. And I see Baba whenever I come to this group, I can see him all around, and not only that, I feel a great wavelength in the group, and there is a lot of acceptance of the learnings from the other, and that is really great, because a lot of groups where I go, we see that the energy falls apart, and that's fun. But so I like the energy of this group, because there is a lot of equilibrium in the group, and we are all really doing some good job. So I think we are doing great learning, and I think we are moving towards that introspection that the time demands.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you. Huh?
Couldn't agree with you more. I said I've been
Absolutely
having this excitement about how this group has moved. So I've kept thinking about that. I'm very happy.
Vidya, we've been talking
Baba's
about
blessing.
this, and we've said many times among Kama, Karthik, and myself that Baba is in the group. Namita also shares that. And I have not been able to do this throughout my life. It's the first time in last 6 weeks.
There's a hidden window.
Something is there. Baba is there, I guess.
Vidya, your feeling of a long continuous day, I put it as sort of a COVID experience which is continuously happening to all of us, putting us at home, and we are losing sight of day and night, and experiencing one continuous phase in life. Maybe that is sort of a picture you are projecting. Probably I am equating that to, because earlier we used to have office, come back home, there used to be some sort of a change in the thing. Now it is all happening at the same time. Office is also at home, home is also at home.
I had been going to office for the last 2-3 weeks. I've been going to work, and I'm spending long hours at work. In fact, Ganga was here for 2-3 days. I think Ganga is also on the call today. I spent 9 evenings till 11 at home. So I
There's some audio issue.
Audio disturbance.
Is it better?
Yeah.
Whose side was it?
I think for a change, to answer you, I've been really working hard for last 3 weeks. I've been going to work. I've been working at home, and since there is no help or not much help at home, so I've also been working at home. So whole lockdown period, I've been super busy actually. So yeah, but I think we are all going through this lockdown time where we are not going out and doing all the usual stuff. So maybe your version is also right.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we are almost out of time, so I will not continue the reading. We can stop the recording and continue with the second part, which is over to Mama's topic.